Good work.
All right, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. Statement, I'm not sure what that is, and then a roll call.
And I think it's hold on, I'll find the statement. You can start with introductions, but it's essentially because this is a virtual meeting, that's an open meeting, there's some hoopla we're supposed to say. I'll find that statement.
Okay, and then should I do a roll call before we do introductions?
Sure, I think it's, there's you and Lori and Mike are the 3 voting members. So okay. I think that is the quorum, and that is just the main voting folks.
Okay, so I don't need to do anything there.
Nope.
All right, with all of that taken care of, why don't we go around and do introductions? I'll go ahead and start. I am Jay Young, and I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Fair Housing Council, and I am the chair of the subcommittee. And with that, I will pass it on to Lori.
Hi, I'm Lori Mazerbo. I'm the Chief Program Officer at our Family Services. And I will pass it on to Keith.
I'm Keith Bagwell. I work for Pima County Supervisor Adelita Grijalva. Part of our strategic plan that we just completed is to look into affordable housing issues and see what we can do to help out with that. So I'm here to observe and listen and see what you're up to, and see if there's any way we can help out in the long run. And I'll pass it off to Alice.
Sure. Hi, I'm Allison Miller. I'm a principal planner in the city's Housing and Community Development Department. And I am learning how to be the staff liaison to this subcommittee. So thanks.
Mike, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure, I'll go. I'm Mike Edmonds. I currently am the vice chair of the Commission on Equitable Housing Development, as well as a resident in Tucson House, Barrio Blue Moon neighborhood. I assist Ward 3 and involved in Thrive in 05. With that, I will pass it on to Jasmine, I believe.
Jasmine Chan. I work for the city. I'm in the city manager's office, nominally overseeing Proposition 407 Parks and Connections bond. Here because Anne knows I'm interested in affordable housing and also the racist past of our institutions. So that's part of why she invited me here today. Yeah, on that note, I'll pass it to Anne.
Thanks, Jasmine. I'm happy you're here. I'm Anne. I'm a deputy director here at the Department of Housing and Community Development. And as Allison mentioned, she'll be the staff liaison for the subcommittee, but I also have a real interest in this topic. And so I'll try to join when we can, when I can. And I think, Joe, I think you're the last one. Oh.
And Nicholas.
And Nicholas. Yep. Sorry. I just realized that as well.
Don't want to leave anybody out. I'm Joe Audino. I'm a core member of the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition. I'm a co-founder and board member of the Historic 4th Avenue Coalition, and I have interest in housing policy, so that's why I'm here. And I guess we still have Nicholas. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm also like Keith. I'm a special staff assistant for Supervisor Grijalva, District 5, and Keith and I were kind of doing some reconnaissance to see what we can be helping with. So thank you for having us.
Great, thank you, everybody. With that, we can move into the number 2 on the agenda. We've got a couple of things to talk about here. The first one is discussing our subcommittee name. So why don't we start there? I guess the first question is, do we want a different name? Because I guess at this point it's the Housing Segregation Subcommittee.
And Jay, just a little more context there for those that aren't aware. That working title name came from the commission recently redid the mission statement and identified key goals. And I'm happy to share my screen regarding that at any point. But a part of the mission statement and then one of the key goals had to do with housing segregation, and then I would say equitable housing generally. So I feel like depending on what the purpose of the subcommittee is, that housing segregation might be a little limiting in terms of a name, and that if it is more about equitable housing, some of the main commissioners expressed an interest in maybe having it be more general than focusing specifically on housing segregation, but that is up to you, all of you.
Hey, Jay.
Yes, go ahead.
What do you think about coming back to that question at the end of this meeting or beginning of the next one? Because it's just a thought.
No, that sounds like a good idea. Considering the next piece of number 2 is the purpose of the subcommittee. So maybe after some discussion about the purpose, we can circle back to the name, and I guess really we can probably do that anytime we want. So why don't we move on then to the purpose of the subcommittee? I have some thoughts that I have about it, but I'd love to hear from the rest of you at this point as to what some ideas you have regarding the purpose of the subcommittee.
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure. I think Jasmine, if I remember correctly, you made the comment about the history of Tucson. And to let everybody know, my knowledge about the history of segregation of Tucson is really just based on a 30-minute documentary I saw on PBS on KUAT. Because I was not aware. I've been here on and off since 1980. I was not aware of any segregation history. Every so often I hear about Dunbar, but I'm not well versed in it. So I need to learn, I guess, from you all about what has and has not happened.
Anyone else? Thoughts, Lori?
I guess I'm a little unclear about exactly what our task purpose is, but when I think about equitable housing and segregation, I think about things like our neighborhoods that have been around for a long time and gentrification. I think about things like that as well. So not only access to equitable housing, but preserving some of the history maybe that in Tucson in our older neighborhoods.
And in terms of these conversations, obviously there are only 3 members of the subcommittee at this point. Is this conversation just between the 3 of us at this point, or can it be anybody who's attending?
So 2 things. One is subcommittees can have, you don't even have to be an ex officio on the main commission if people are interested in being a part of the subcommittee, they can absolutely be on the subcommittee. Second piece is you as the chair can recognize anybody as part of the conversation.
So that being the case, recruiting members obviously is another thing that we want to talk about, but does anyone else that's not officially a member of the subcommittee at this point have any thoughts about what potentially the purpose of the subcommittee could be? With that, obviously jump in if anybody has any more thoughts, but Mike, I think that what you bring up is, for me, what is so important about this subcommittee, and maybe for me is really a place to start. I've spent the last, since 2008, working in the fair housing world, and one of the things that you learn very early on is that housing is segregated in this country, and the reason that it's segregated by race and ethnicity for the most part is because of housing policies, largely before the passage of the Fair Housing Act, but even after the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, that explicitly excluded non-white folks from the mortgage market, relegating non-white people to specific parts of town. And that's the history of pretty much every community in this country. And as a matter of fact, the work that we've done at the Southwest Fair Housing Council over the years, we've mapped actually, we've created what we call an opportunity index. And basically we, using census data, have created maps that show areas of high and low opportunity. And when we're talking about opportunity, you know, it's all the things that we think of when we think of things that we need as people in our communities to thrive. So, you know, education, access to transportation, access to healthcare, you know, there are other access to housing, obviously. And we used a methodology to rank those different things and created an index that shows, again, areas of high and low opportunity. And using mapping, we have overlaid race and ethnicity data to show one, where you know, where segregation exists in the community and how that relates to access to opportunity. And essentially in Tucson, as in many communities throughout this country, really most communities, areas that have a higher minority concentration almost are always areas of lower opportunity. And so for me, you know, Mike, going back to the education piece, I think that the segregated housing, we've never really done anything about it. And so, you know, the laws that were explicitly racist that created a lot of our housing patterns have never been proactively addressed. So we really still, the legacy of that are the housing patterns that we have today. It's changed some, but by and large, that's still in place. But I think the issue is that, you know, essentially so few people know about that, yet it is fundamental to, you know, affordable housing, why people live where they live. And again, that legacy is still with us today. So from my perspective, you know, education is a key part of what I think we should do, at least in the beginning, as a committee. And I would really love to bring what we kind of learn together as a committee and bring that back to the commission as a whole. Because again, I think, you know, the more we learn about it, the more that I've learned about it, the more I realize, you know, how critical it is to housing, generally speaking, and particularly affordable housing. And Lori, you mentioned, you know, history and gentrification. You know, again, if you look at the history of housing, you know, areas of higher minority concentration have lower housing values, and they're still appraised that way. And so, you know, areas that have lower housing values are ripe for gentrification, particularly as the price of housing goes up. So, you know, it's still all very much intertwined. I think gentrification and displacement, the reason, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of others, the reason that gentrification and displacement happens is largely because of this legacy of segregation. So, you know, there's some really good books. There's some articles that have come out. There's quite a bit written about it. So, you know, I think that's a piece of education that we can do. And then I guess the other thing that I'm interested in, and I'd love to know some more feedback, you know, again, having created some maps and looked at the data related to this topic, I think it would be great to potentially update the data, maybe update some maps so that we actually have, you know, a baseline of data and a visual representation that can be used, that we can all kind of base the conversation on and base our learning on it and take back to the group. So anyway, that was kind of a long-winded on my part, but you know, again, the education and data piece I think are critical for this committee, and I'd love to know what others think about that.
Okay, so Lori, was it you that mentioned the history? Mentioned history then, not Jazz? Okay, all right. Well, it is without putting a lot of labor on maybe you and Lori and others who may have the information, would it be possible for people to share some information with the rest of the subcommittee, what they have available quickly, easily, so we can try to catch up to where you are?
Yeah, so one of the things I can do, I'm certainly happy to, and maybe this is something that I can do internally at Southwest Fair Housing Council. I know that we don't have all of the mapping and data that we've created up on our website, so maybe I can get it up there, and also I'm happy to share those maps and other information with the subcommittee. And then I think a really great starting point, I know it might be a lot to ask, but I think it's maybe 2017, 2018, what I think has really become the definitive book about this topic is called The Color of Law, and it's by Richard Rothstein. It's maybe 250 pages, give or take, but he really does an excellent job of laying out all of the different layers of public policy that went into creating this, what happened in the private sector, and then other ways in which this happened. So I'd say that's a great place to start.
Anne has a copy. Can I borrow that?
It's an excellent book.
You said The Color of Law, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right. Yeah, Joe?
I will put The Color of Law on my list. I've heard of that. I had also heard good things about Keeanga Yamada Taylor's Race for Profit, how banks and real estate industry undermine Black home ownership, and I have that on my desk as well. I had heard good things about that. And well, it's not specifically about segregation. I wonder if Lydia Otero's La Calle, which is specific to Tucson and does deal with how the city has been developed from, you know, the territorial period through today, might be a relevant reading for the commission as well.
Absolutely.
So Jay, in terms of in thinking big picture about what the subcommittee can talk about, again, I'm staff, I'm not here to direct anything, but I do think it might be worth, I'm going to share my screen just for 1 second. In particular, if people aren't aware of kind of the revised, hold on, mission. So, and Mike, thanks for your words here. So the commission will review, investigate, and recommend actions to the mayor and council based on research, data, and inclusive public input to increase the number of housing units that will. And the first one's about developing and preserving affordability for all Tucsonans. Second one is to protect barrios and communities from rapid change in displacement, as well as structural disinvestment. And I feel like I wanted to highlight that one because I feel like the other subcommittees aren't really set up to talk about that. And so in thinking of the commission really making sure that that is something that is thought about through the recommendations, I do think that's a lens that the subcommittee can really offer. And then 3 is cultivating landlords and developers as partners in providing equitable, accessible, and quality housing. And so in terms of the other subcommittees, you know, there's one focused on affordable housing, and they're all just like this subcommittee. They're all meeting this month for the first time. So everyone's trying to just sort of figure out what the goals are and how it all fits together. But that one's really focused on how do we increase the number of units, period. Then there's the permanent supportive housing subcommittee, really focusing on expanding permanent supportive housing. And then in terms of what was voted on, and this is, we can wordsmith this all you want, but just in terms of what, based on the exercise the commission did, the housing segregation, maybe soon to be called something else, the subcommittee, is to address housing segregation by race, ethnicity, disability, and access to opportunities in Tucson. And just in, I think everyone was getting tired that I wanted to make sure I just put that in parentheses, housing patterns showing the legacy of racism, just to kind of provide some context into that. And so just bringing up that, I think I personally agree with everything you said, and also think that in thinking about the city's other goals and priorities, where does the discussions about preventing displacement and really thinking about what investment means to the neighborhoods that this investment's going into, what that means. So, okay, I'll shush now.
Yeah, no, I think, Ann, that's a great point. And I think that if we look at the bigger picture of housing segregation and kind of the history of that, I think it flows right into the idea of gentrification and displacement. And I know, Joe, I think you're part of the Barrio Neighborhood Coalition. Is that right? I know that at least that group has been looking into this and probably has a lot of good information and resources as well. So I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Not to interrupt, but I did just want to say, I just put a link into the chat for everybody of a graduate thesis that was written called Wrong Side of the Tracks. And for those of you who might need a little bit more information on the actual history of racism and how it affected specifically Tucson neighborhoods of color, it's a really, really well-written piece that does give quite a lot of background and provides a lot more additional reading. So I was fortunate enough to actually be in the grad program with Ms. Adams, who wrote this thesis. And so I highly recommend it in case you need any more reference. So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, no, that's great, Nicholas. And Janie actually was worked for us for a while when she was working on the paper as well. So it's good to bring that in the conversation. All right, y'all. Well, where do we go from here in terms of our purpose? And, I guess I'm just wondering, how much do we need to, nail this down, or do we need to, what do we need to come up with today in terms of like what our purpose is? Do we need to like have that stated, or what do we need to do here, Anne, in terms of kind of nailing that down?
I think that's up to you. I don't feel like you need to feel like you know exactly what you're doing the second. And so I think over time, if you get to a point where you feel like you've revised or established goals, you can make that more formal. But for now, I'd say just discussing and coming up and feeling good as a group on where you're going is enough.
I mean, I guess I'm certainly happy to, obviously, are there notes being taken for the meeting today, and will that go out? How is that happening?
Yes, I'm attempting to take notes. Usually the, like legal action reports are pretty bare bones, but I'm definitely keeping note of the resources that people are talking about, especially.
Great. I guess I was just gonna propose to the group, since I think, kind of getting our feet on the ground in terms of educating ourselves as a committee, I think, seems to be kind of a first point of business. I wonder if we kind of work that angle for the first couple of meetings, and then as we kind of, develop an understanding as a group of housing segregation and the history and gentrification and displacement. I mean, we've got a couple of good resources. I wonder if the purpose will just kind of become more clear as we educate ourselves. And I guess I'm just proposing maybe we don't define it as clearly maybe as we could today, and wait and see how that develops. I don't know what y'all think. All right, so I guess we'll leave it there for now, unless there's more conversation to be had around the purpose. Moving on, the next thing on the agenda under number 2 is recruiting members, and also when our regular meeting time will be coming up. So what does the group feel like about recruiting members? I mean, do we want to have a particular number that we're looking for in terms of the group? Are we looking for representation from certain constituencies? Where do we want to go from here in terms of recruiting folks?
Yeah, I was going to pose a question to Anne. Do we have any limitations? Are there some like thou shalt not?
Nope, it's the only thou shall not. You can't have more than 5 voting members of the commission, because that would constitute a quorum. But I think it's pretty flexible.
Oh, Jay, maybe we all as a group could brainstorm, and then maybe submit some recommendations and suggestions of names and people to you to share with the subcommittee.
Sure. you want to do some brainstorming now, Mike, or?
The
thinking
only
maybe
ones that come at the
offline?
top of my head, but I'd like to give you names other than, this person who may exist. It might be a good idea. I'm thinking, again, with my limited knowledge, I'm thinking Dunbar comes to mind, top of my head. So whoever's involved with Dunbar. I don't have a name for you.
The neighborhood or the Dunbar Center?
Maybe the Dunbar Center, because I assume they would have more of the access to more of the history. I assume this. I could be wrong.
Mhm.
And then I'm learning about the other area within Thrive that I learned about. It's a little north of here. Maybe Ann and maybe Allison can help me with the area I'm thinking of.
Are you thinking Sugar Hill?
That's it.
Obviously, we've mentioned in Barrio Neighborhood Coalition. I don't know if Joe or you or somebody would Barrio Neighborhood Coalition might be interested in joining the subcommittee, but I know you guys are well organized and represent different constituencies and neighborhood groups.
Well, you're already giving us too much credit. I don't think we're that well organized, but we're trying to get our stuff together. I'm not sure of the time commitment I'll be able to make. I would love to serve on on one of these committees or multiple ones, and I'll definitely let you know if I can. I can also put out a word to the rest of the BNC to see if there's somebody who might be available and like to be on this committee and kind of has knowledge and experience that would be relevant.
Joe, do you know of other groups out there that maybe Barrio Neighborhood Coalition is connected with, or at least knows about, that might bring something to the subcommittee?
There's one I'm thinking, oh gosh, there was somebody we were talking with a couple months ago, and I'm trying to remember what the group was. I can't think of it off the top of my head. We've had members visit other communities in Texas and connect with similar organizations in San Antonio and some other places. But as far as relevant to Tucson, that might be for this. If I can think of the organization that is eluding me right now, I'll let you know.
Great. Yeah, again, aside from Barrio Neighborhood Coalition, I'm wondering if there are other groups or, folks that are really active in terms of dealing with gentrification and displacement. I guess Flowers and Bullets comes to mind. I don't know how active they are still, or if they're, really working in that space, or, potentially the People's Defense Initiative. Again, I'm just kind of trying to think of, more grassroots groups that are on the ground and that can bring, I guess, really the lived experience. Because I think that one of the things that, this is just my perspective. I feel like my work has been much more kind of in the office from a 30,000 foot perspective. And I think really what can be critical for this discussion and making sure that we provide good contribution to the overall commission is actually, getting the voice of folks in the community that are living in a place experiencing gentrification or that have been displaced. So again, those are two groups that come to mind. I just wonder if there are any other folks that might fit that bill.
Jay, to you and the other members of the subcommittee, just another group popped in my head. I don't know if they fit segregation, etc. But the Pasquayaki tribe has some land over here near Grant and I-10, and maybe they might have something worthy to contribute to the conversations.
Sure. Lori, I think looked like you were speaking, but I didn't hear anything. Oh, there you go.
I was thinking about the neighborhood centers. I know when our family did some work years ago with the elder population, that there are some groups that meet at the neighborhood centers that are really focused on housing in those neighborhoods, and they tend to be poor areas. While I don't know who those folks would be, it feels like it might be a good idea if we got that information out to like El Rio Neighborhood Center. I can't think of the others, but I know there's several.
Which I think kind of also goes to the point of how do we recruit? I mean, obviously, we're coming up with some names and potentially some places, but from here, once we leave this meeting, between now and next meeting, or over the next 6 months or year, however, how do y'all want to go about recruiting new members? Do we just want to kind of trust, and if we kind of have ideas, we just invite people, or do we want to, come back to the group and maybe for next meeting have a list of folks we want to reach out to? What's the how moving forward?
I'm thinking letters, emails to the heads or leaders or officers of different agencies, associations.
Do we want to put names forward and consider them as a group, like in our meetings before we formally invite people, or do we want to be less formal about it? Because I think that makes sense, Mike. But before people are invited, do we want to like vet folks with during our meetings here, or how do we want to approach that?
Does sound like a good idea. I like it.
So bringing people before the committee, or bringing names to the committee, and then deciding as a group if they would potentially be a good fit. Is that? Yeah. What do you think, Lori?
I actually was thinking the opposite, in that if we could get a wider, more diverse group of people who are interested, instead of hand picking folks. That feels more equitable to me, that you kind of put the word out and folks that are interested. But I also see the value in specifically inviting someone, making them feel like we want to hear your voice at the table in particulars.
Yeah, I mean, I can really see it both ways. I mean, I can see bringing vetting it with the group first before someone is invited, making sense for kind of what you're saying, Lori. But I can also see it being a little overly bureaucratic and slowing us down in terms of getting people on the subcommittee. So I don't know. I mean, why don't we do this? Why don't we, between now and next meeting, why don't we come up with some names, some organizations, get a little bit better list, and then we can regroup and think about how we want to do it. Maybe not invite people between now and the next meeting, and think about how we want to do it between now and then. I don't mean to put it off, but that's a proposal, I guess, that I would have. Does that seem reasonable? Yeah, Jasmine?
I just wanted to share that in other like volunteer capacities that I've been in, we have struggled with getting folks to engage when we aren't very clear about what we're doing,
Right.
what our aim is. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue going on here, right? Because I think it does require some baseline understanding of what is happening here. What does segregation look like here in terms of housing, and what are the outcomes of that? And then the next question, at least to me, the next question would be, okay, what do we do about what are the outcomes we see? And yeah, so it's hard to make that definition of like what the purpose of the subcommittee would be, to then be able to attract folks who would be interested, because I'm imagining many of the people that are coming to mind are all very busy individuals. So being able to be very clear about what this group is aiming to do will be helpful in then them understanding, okay, what would my role be if I were to say yes to this? So just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And it also makes me think that, maybe in the beginning, the folks that we think about recruiting, again, if really the first thing that we need to do is, as a group, we kind of need to educate ourselves about the topic. I'm wondering if maybe from the beginning, the way that we approach recruiting is, we are specific about who we're recruiting in terms of, potentially bringing people onto the subcommittee that know the subject and can maybe help lay that foundation and then help us, as a group determine more clearly what the purpose is. Because Jasmine, I think you're exactly right. If you go out and don't have much of an ask of people, asking them to come to a meeting like this without an expressed purpose or an ask often doesn't work these days. So point well taken. Other thoughts at this point, y'all? Where are we with the recruiting, at least for the next meeting or two? Do we want to come up with some names and be more pointed and revisit this next meeting, or I don't know, where are we landing here?
But I'm willing to try to do some brainstorming before the next meeting.
Okay, Lori?
Good to me.
Okay. All right. So between now and the next meeting, let's try and think of some folks who we think would be a good fit for the committee. And also, I guess I would just, again, keep in mind, let's try and think of some people who, in this really early stage of us trying to define our purpose, be a little bit more focused. I mean, I think it'd be great to have as many names as possible, but maybe when we come together next meeting, we're really trying to think of, who are those folks who would, add the most value, and we would really have an ask for, which is, hey, we're, trying to figure out the purpose of the subcommittee, and we're trying to educate ourselves about this topic. Could you come on the subcommittee because we think you would potentially bring something like that to the table? So maybe we can leave it there for now, which then takes us to when do we want to meet regularly? Well, let me start here. Does this day and time work for everybody? It works for you, Lori?
I mean, I can make it work. I think anytime we picked could not work. So,
For sure.
So I feel like I made this one. I can make this one again.
Yeah. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, that's why I was looking at my calendar. We're talking what, fourth Thursday of every month, huh?
I guess, is this the fourth Thursday?
Yeah. The reason I say that is because every third Thursday I have a standing. The day is literally blocked out. So
is the next fourth Thursday October 21st, or is it the 28th?
1, 2, 3,
Looks like
28th.
28th. Yeah.
It looks like I can make that work at this point. I do have a standing meeting at 2:30 on Thursdays. So it should work okay, but I do have that. So maybe we'll go with the Thursday, the 28th, and we'll say, at least at this point, the fourth Thursday of every month at 1 o'clock.
Would it help to make it 12:30 so you can make your standing meeting? Because is this meeting 2 hours or is it an hour and a half?
Or can we just say this is an hour and a half? I mean, 2 hours is pretty long. Would you guys?
I think I've got it logged as an hour and a half. I believe that's what my calendar says.
I gave us a big buffer. I think an hour and a half is probably fine.
All right. Cool. So we'll go with an hour and a half at this point. And we've got our next meeting time and our time going forward. So, and obviously if this doesn't work, or we get more people and this time doesn't work, obviously we can revisit it. So, all right, well, that was easy enough. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about under number 2 that we've already, any of these topics before we move on to call to the audience, or are we good where we are? All right, so number 3 is a call to the audience. Do I need to read the text there and under the agenda? All right, call to the audience. Anybody in the audience like to address the committee? I mean, I guess you guys have already been addressing us, right? So, okay, hearing none. Number 4, top 3 goals of the subcommittee. I mean, to me, that seems kind of like the purpose of the subcommittee. It seems a little premature. I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Is there discussion about this at this point, or what are your thoughts?
When I think about a potential goal of this particular subcommittee is maybe adding information towards our commission regarding future new housing and its demographics, maybe. Try to have a mixture. Mixture is the first word that comes to mind of different types of people in neighborhoods.
Okay. Other thoughts? I mean, again, I think at this point, I think the education piece is key. I just, so few people, I think, understand housing segregation and how that plays into our, overall housing and the market and everything. So I would propose education about housing segregation and the, associated components, or maybe segregation, gentrification, and displacement, or something like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Any other ideas? Maybe number 3 is we'll just leave that open and see what kind of lands. I mean, again, we've got a lot of work to do, I think, in terms of purpose. So. All right, so Mike, what I heard you say about one of the potential goals is, info to the commission about kind of mixture of folks in neighborhoods and how that relates to housing, something along those lines.
Yeah, the positive effects of it. It could be healthy. It educates the population about all citizens, all residents. It just a sharing of culture, backgrounds, that kind of thing.
So in the fair housing world, well, really the Fair Housing Act has got 2 parts. And I think the second part, Mike, is kind of along the lines of what you're talking about. Actually, another good document to educate both the subcommittee and our committee about segregation and just fair housing in general is it's called the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. And it's part of the consolidated plan that the city and the county do every 5 years as part of their obligation to receive community development block grant funding from the federal government. And it's a relatively comprehensive look at kind of the state of fair housing. So anyway, that being said, fair housing is really 2 parts. One is kind of what I think most of us would understand, which is if you experience discrimination that's illegal under the Fair Housing Act, you have a right to seek remedy to that, to exercise your fair housing rights and to live where you want. So really an enforcement mechanism about discrimination that happens today. But the other part of the Fair Housing Act says that communities are obligated to affirmatively further fair housing. So not just not discriminate, but actually be proactive in undoing segregated housing patterns that we've been talking about today. So the Fair Housing Act does actually mandate that. And Mike, really the way that I think about affirmatively furthering fair housing in this obligation is that cities are obligated to create integrated communities of opportunity. So again, undoing segregated housing patterns and making sure that, wherever you live, you have access to the opportunities you need to thrive. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I do think that what you're talking about essentially, Mike, is an obligation that jurisdictions have under the Fair Housing Act. So I don't know if maybe, I don't want to get, too technical, but, looking at affirmatively furthering fair housing or, looking at integration and opportunity, or seems like that's kind of at least what I'm interpreting you kind of putting out there. Is that?
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of not as a mandate, but encouragement.
Sure.
Yeah. And you said it's called analysis of impediments
To fair housing choice.
Okay.
And may know where that lives on the city's website. Actually, at this moment, don't.
I
Usually
can
take
give
it
you
from
a
the
link.
county's website.
Yeah, we've been moving things around on our website, and so we'll be sure to send that out with the minutes.
Okay. All right, so we've got two kind of loose goals at this point for our subcommittee. Any more thoughts about tying that down more now, or are y'all okay with kind of leaving those as placeholders and continuing to develop those goals as we kind of educate ourselves more about the topic and think more about the purpose of the subcommittee? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm open to having that third slot open because I just thought of what I thought of, and at this point, so.
I guess we could also, if we decide to, have more goals. So.
Jay, I just wanted to say I'm like looking at notes from the earlier conversation, and I had noted that you kind of expressed a goal of updating the data around, and maybe that's part of education, but just wanted to throw that out there too.
Sure. And that seems reasonable.
And then one clarifying question I have in terms of getting out information is if you want us to still say it's the Housing Segregation Subcommittee, or, and this can shift over time, or if you'd rather us put it out as the Equitable Housing Subcommittee or something else until you settle on a name. Just sort of what working title would you like?
I mean, I personally am fine with the Housing Segregation Subcommittee. I think it's important to name housing segregation. I mean, I think equity is a part of that, but I think that the long-term goal is really to look at segregation. So I'm okay leaving it at that. But obviously, if the group wants to do something different, I'm open to that as well. I can't hear you, Lori. Can you guys hear?
I think segregation gets people's attention.
Yeah.
It got mine. I was like, we're going to be talking about segregation, are we? What does that mean?
Cool. We could also maybe change it later to be, segregation and equity or something, but I'm fine keeping it Housing Segregation Subcommittee at this point.
Actually, I had thought about the same thing you just said, Jay, the Housing Segregation and Equity Subcommittee, but
yeah,
I didn't know if that was going to work.
Well, let's just keep it Housing Segregation Subcommittee for simplicity's sake at this point. And again, if we want to circle back and change it as we, again, get more information. I feel like I'm kind of suggesting that we not make any concrete decisions at this point about a lot of things, but, considering I think where we are in terms of, our understanding as a group about the topic and kind of, not being super clear about our purpose and stuff, I just feel like, keeping things a little bit nebulous at this point at least makes more sense to me. I hope that makes sense to y'all as well. So, but we did get a couple of good, more concrete things down as well. So, okay. Any more thoughts about number 4, the goals of the subcommittee? Next on our agenda is input on the affordable housing strategy, and I will be honest, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Go ahead, Ann.
So most of you are aware that Liz Morales, our director, presented to the mayor and council on affordable housing on August 10th. So, and before she did that, she talked to the commission in terms of what she was going to present and got input from the commission. As you know, what came out of that was a motion by the council to have HCD return in 90 days with the comprehensive affordable housing strategy. And so I bring this up because we've been working on putting something together. And, you know, myself, particularly in the current environment with COVID still being something that I think people that, in my opinion, needs to be taken really seriously, it's going to be challenging to get real good input in this environment. And so that, and I think the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development was formed, and the representation of that group, I think, can really help us as we look to put this strategy together. So today, I'm not ready to quite share what we've been thinking about yet. And I think that in part because we're still in the very beginning stages of collecting. There's been a lot of work done, as you know. We've had the housing market study. We've had a lot of pieces of a strategy coming together. And so at this point, I'm trying to take all of that and last meeting, the woman from Phoenix presented on the Phoenix housing plan. I think that's been a real model for us because in my mind, it's a really short summary of the data and the need, and then it focuses on action. And so to me, I really want our plan to focus on action. And so really hoping that the full commission, but then the subcommittees from your different lenses provide input as we move along. And so even though we're not quite at a point where I feel like I have a lot concrete to share, I did want to just start talking about where I can see this subcommittee providing some input into it. So like the Phoenix housing plan, I want to take the housing market study, which was a deep dive into a lot of these issues, and really distill it into the most important data points that show the need for affordable housing and affordability, which I do think are two different things that are really important. And I'll say last year, Housing Community Development worked on the People, Communities, and Homes investment plan. And throughout that process, we really did think through housing's racist legacy and really how does structural inequalities play into everything we do. And so there was a really extensive data chapter in the PCHIP plan in which we really tried to present data by race and ethnicity as the census does, which we know is imperfect. And I don't plan on doing a full data deep dive again in this plan, but I do want to pick some of the key indicators that show why the Housing Segregation Subcommittee is important. And so a couple things that stand out in my mind that I'm thinking I want to include in the plan, but really interested in you all thinking about this and each month talking about it more. I mean, Jay, you mentioned the opportunity maps. And so to me, thinking about distilling this into a couple key data points, you can see this. This is from the Poverty and Urban Stress website that HCD has put together, but this is the race and ethnicity, again, defined as by the American Community Survey. So it's race and ethnicity where people are living across Tucson. And when you talk about housing segregation, I mean, I think to me, this is a pretty clear illustration showing that why we're talking about this. So I'm thinking of including something like this just to show the data. You can even see on the right-hand side here, you know, Ward 1 is about 75% Hispanic Latino in terms of what people indicated on the survey. And then Ward 6 is Ward 6 is 60% white. And so just thinking about what this means to Tucson, I think this is one. And then I think I have to stop sharing before I turn over. This is from PCHIP. This is home ownership rates by race and ethnicity in Tucson. So you can see that in Tucson, we have about 55% home ownership rates among white people. It's 30% in the Black population. And so those are just a couple things in terms of thinking about key things that can be included in the strategy to inform and talk about the importance of the actions. In terms of the action, so what does that correspond to via actions? One that we've been working on and would love this incorporated as a strategy is thinking about how to provide in our housing decisions, provide access to areas of opportunity. And so in thinking about what that means, we've been trying to create an affordable housing checklist to prioritize locations for affordable housing. So thinking about locating housing next to key amenities such as transit stops or high quality schools or access to libraries, community centers, et cetera, grocery stores, and also thinking about trying to provide opportunities and not have a concentration of low-income populations, subsidized housing, communities of color. And so we've been really trying to think through what that looks like. And so just wanted to tell you that as we move along, I will be wanting your input and see if you have sort of preliminary thoughts on things that you would like to see included in the strategy, since you're getting in on the ground floor of us starting to think about putting it together. And happy to answer any questions on that too. And Allison, feel free to jump in if I've missed anything.
Jay, if I may.
Yeah, please.
And I don't want to throw us off track. I just want to tell you and that I got questions, which maybe we'll have time with any luck to have some deep conversations about later. But from the map that you showed, I'm interested in learning more about the 2 tribal land parcels. I know the one over there by Silverbill and Grant that I saw that was obvious. I was surprised by the other one that's a little southeast, but I'd like to learn more about it later. And also in regards to home ownership, I know my brain started racing about the history of home ownership in the metropolitan area, as well as some cultural values that may have played in there, because what I saw in the graph, but didn't surprise me because I have family that's Asian, that they are, they're number 2 in home ownership, I think, or 3. On that chart you showed us. So again, it didn't surprise me, but it didn't surprise me what it did for Tucson, as well as economic past history stuff.
For Tucson, Hispanic Latino is number 2.
Number 2. Oh, then there were 3, right? Number 3. Okay. Yeah, that one caught me a little bit by surprise. So I'd like to learn more about how that became as it is. If we have the information or answers, I don't know that we do.
Mike, I think the book, The Color of Law, lays out why that is how it is, and really goes back to exclusion of non-white folks from the mortgage market legally before the Fair Housing Act, and as recently as 2018. Again, these different information sources pop into my head, but there's a investigative journalism organization group called Reveal, and in 2018 they did a deep dive looking at mortgage statistics in this country, and found that African Americans are still 3 times more likely to be denied a mortgage as compared to similarly situated white borrowers. So if you control for everything else, African Americans are still 3 times more likely to be denied a mortgage as compared to white people. And it kind of cascades down from there based on race and ethnicity, but there's still a lot of bias in the mortgage market that plays out, and I personally and others believe is still just basically kind of due to the system not having changed and the kind of racism that's still baked into it. So anyway, the color of law really lays out a lot of reasons and history about, you know, what's led to those different patterns. One of the things that I was also going to bring up, and that when you were talking was, you know, again, the citing of affordable housing. And, you know, I think as a commission, we're still working through this, right? I mean, it's like there's affordable housing that is constructed through, you know, low-income housing tax credits, which I think are the like main kind of affordable housing that gets built. And again, in 2015, there was a case that went to the Supreme Court called the Inclusive Communities Project, or the ICP decision, where a group out of Dallas, I believe, sued the city of Dallas because they basically, the city of Dallas essentially cited all of its affordable housing projects in low-income African-American areas, contrary to what the Fair Housing Act says should happen. So, you know, again, there are a lot of reasons why affordable housing gets cited where it does, but communities, again, under the Fair Housing Act are supposed to be undoing housing segregation as opposed to continuing to exacerbate it, which is what a lot is what oftentimes happens. And it's, you know, there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the system's kind of set up that way, but I think, you know, again, as we're talking about affordable housing and thinking about our obligations under the Fair Housing Act and undoing segregation, the citing of affordable housing is critical. And the other thing, and that in looking at the maps you showed, and, you know, I think this is difficult for us as a commission because we're centered on Tucson, but, you know, to think that the housing market is Tucson and Marana and the foothills, that it's a different housing market, you know, it's not. It's all together. And, you know, if you look, you know, kind of zoom out a little bit farther and you look at the county as a whole, it gets even wider in particular areas and higher concentrations of minority populations. So anyway, you know, I think that's an issue that we need to deal with because, you know, again, historically, the mortgage market allowed certain folks to move out into unincorporated Pima County and others were not able to. So it's kind of hard to talk about this without looking at the metro area as a whole, even though, you know, we're theoretically or supposedly just focusing on Tucson. So just some more thoughts.
Good point, Jay. That was from our the city's poverty and stress report, but we can certainly pull the data for outside too.
Well, and the maps that we created for really look at Pima County. So I can also, again, when we share the maps that we created at Southwest Fair Housing Council, it shows a larger area. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I'm also interested, as you talk about different municipalities in other areas, nobody's mentioned anything about South Tucson yet, which is, you know, its own city, but of course surrounded by Tucson, and I think giving thought to how our recommendations impact and can assist that area as well, even though it's not strictly speaking part of Tucson, and this is a City of Tucson commission, might be something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Joe, I think it's such a good point as well, because I think when you talk about gentrification and displacement, you know, clearly gentrification and displacement is radiating from downtown, and particularly going south, it's starting to affect South Tucson. So yeah, do we stop thinking about it and talking about it when it hits South Tucson and pick it up down across the border? You know, I mean, so of Tucson and South Tucson, meaning that border. So anyway, yeah, good point. Any more thoughts about number 5, input on the affordable housing strategy?
And Jay, just my plan, as we get further along, I'll keep bringing it back and asking for your input on it. Both all the subcommittees and the full commission, and also really open and interested in hearing from you all in terms of, at a minimum, we plan on doing a stakeholder focus group with affordable housing and market rate developers. We plan on having at least one, if not more, virtual public meetings. I do feel like we've been talking about this and getting input regularly for a while. And so wanting to be mindful of making sure we have public input, then also not planning and talking to death and just getting something out there. And so really open to ideas and thoughts as this moves forward in a quick, I do think if you look back to 90 days from August 10th, I do think that we are hoping to bring it back to council before the end of the year as a draft for input. It'll be something that evolves over time, but some of the key strategies that we want to include in the plan, we're doing well planning and really hoping to get support for some of the things we're working on in a more formal fashion to be able to really help make some of that easier. So an example of that, and part of why we really want to take it to mayor and council this year, is our public housing plan, our plan for our public housing units. And I won't go into all that now, but that's an example of why it's important that we do this relatively quickly.
Great, thanks, Ann. Are we ready to move on to number 6, next steps? All right, next meeting date and time, we did that, so check that one off. Items for future meetings.
Outside of what we've already mentioned, I guess anybody else got any new stuff?
Well, so what are the items for our next meeting? I mean, obviously we've put out a lot of kind of educational materials that we can all begin to review. Is that, how could that potentially be an item for future meeting? I'm just kind of thinking about our next agenda. I mean, do we want to have a good chunk of time where we're reviewing things that we have come across, or do we want to get together a more definitive list of resources that we're trying to review? What does that piece look like for the next meeting, or not? I mean, is that just something we do kind of on our own outside the meeting? And I don't know. So anyway, what do you guys think about kind of group education, or our education as a subcommittee, and how that plays into our next meeting in terms of an agenda item?
I don't know, my head is more towards, maybe submitting some names to the group at our next meeting of potential members, or associates or something. That's kind of where my head's at right now, because otherwise I'm thinking about all the other stuff I'd like to at least try to skim, if not read.
Yeah. Lori, what do you think about for next meeting? Items for future meetings.
I mean, I think until we define things more, that's a hard one to kind of answer. So I think we'll have some better answers once we have some time to look over some stuff, think about who we want at the table.
Great. So I guess what I'm kind of thinking and hearing is discuss the things that we've kind of learned, make sure that we've got a good list going of things educationally that we want to review that are kind of foundational for our work going forward. Obviously, Mike and Lori, you're talking about, who we want to bring onto the subcommittee going forward. So thinking about maybe getting to a concrete list of names, groups, et cetera, together, and how we actually move forward, I think, from next meeting to the following meeting in terms of recruiting folks, if that makes sense. And then, again, I think continuing to think about the purpose based on what we're learning. So I don't know, maybe those are 3 distinct things. I think they obviously overlap, but maybe that's enough for our next meeting. I don't know. What do you guys think at this point? Yeah. Any
I
other?
agree.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, y'all, about items for future meetings?
Jay, one of my thoughts was, if we're talking about education in the area of housing segregation, whether it might be an opportunity to invite some people who really are experts on this and have worked in it for a long time to present to this group and inform us better and fuel those discussions about that. And I don't know who those names would be, but it's more brainstorming that could happen to better inform us and give us options, and again, discussion.
Yeah, no, great idea for sure. So maybe we can go ahead, Mike.
No, finish your thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of put that on the list as a piece of the puzzle, I guess, for, you know, group education is, you know, who can we think of to bring in and potentially present on some topics that we're interested in.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask quickly for myself, if no one else, Allison and Ann, are there any benchmarks, anything that we should be aware of, or that's coming at us, or should be coming at us, or will be coming at us in regard to being a subcommittee? Okay, just checking.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. None that I'm aware of.
All right, y'all, we have worked our way through our agenda, and I just want to make sure to give anybody a last chance to speak or bring anything up before we adjourn. And what's the procedure for adjournment? Do I just say we're adjourned?
Yep.
All right, we're adjourned.
Thanks all.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much for
everybody.
having us.
See you next meeting.